The way I use semicolons is if you start off with a thought and you don't want to finish that thought, but you think for clarity you ought to put punctuation, make things clearer, you can use a semicolon. Right? So here's an example. This is a solid exam. I don't want to finish the thought, but I want to make things clearer, so I put a semicolon. This is a solid exam. I thought the format worked well. Those are two independent clauses. We got a subject, a verb, and an object in both of them. So AP style. Typically when we're talking about AP style, we're talking about mass media. Okay? And within that, journalism, news, what we're going over now. Within that, we look for consistency, clarity, accuracy, and brevity. Those are just the main points we look at. And some of this stuff we already harped on, for instance, brevity. And we'll get to some examples. So this isn't academic writing. You're not going to see really, really big, fancy words. This isn't fiction writing, so you're not going to see really, really long sentences. We look for just straight to the point, and I mean straight to the point when we're talking about this AP style. All right, so who can tell me what's correct? Towards versus toward. Huh? Anyone got any guesses?
Toward.
Toward, without the S. That's right. Forward or forwards? Forward, no S. A lot of us have trouble with this sort of thing. So typically with these words, you drop the S, especially in AP style. So using that in a sentence, a lot of times you can take it out. Not every time, but a lot of times. So if once y'all are writing, when you're going over your work, if you see a lot of that's in the sentence, just go over it and make sure you can or can't take it out. So Jane said that John ran away. You can take it out. Jane said John ran away. Makes just as much sense. So in AP style, we write out 1 through 10, but with 10 plus we use numbers. There are exceptions to this, and it gets a little confusing. All right, so just typically 1 through 10 we write out, but 10 plus we use numbers. Now here's a ratio. 8 and 10 versus 8 and 10. Who can tell me which one's the right one? 1 or 2? Remember what we look for. Consistency.
8.
The second one, right? Second one? Yeah. Yeah, I know, it's hard to say. 1 or 2, right? So that's just highlights what's incorrect and what's correct. So when y'all are writing, if you want to go through these PowerPoints and stuff like that, it'll still show the incorrect and correct versions. Numbers. So with numerical values, here's one of those exceptions. Like I said, it gets a little confusing. We write out 1 through 10, but when you're starting a sentence with a number, this is what you do. So the one in red is incorrect. We don't use the number there, the numerical value for that. So what I would suggest is just don't start a sentence with a number. Otherwise, I have to go through it and double check whether or not it's correct. And like I said, it gets confusing. So if you're starting a sentence with a number, here's 2 examples of how to better do that. In the green. 30 people written out, or about 30 people attended. Okay? Dollars and cents, which one's correct? 1, 2, or 3? It just goes from left to right. 1, 2, or 3. We look for consistency. Got some 3s. What are we thinking? 3s? We all going with 3? We're good with 3? So it's action number 1. Right? Interesting. Because we look for clarity and brevity. We don't have to write out $500. Percentages, really similar. I'll just give you all the answer for this one. It's number 2. It's with the percentage sign and the number, the numerical value. Okay, here, I'll show you. Yeah, gets a little confusing. So we encourage getting an AP style book, but they update like every 2-3 years, maybe every year, so you don't have to do that if you don't want. I do also suggest going to Purdue Owl and getting a cheat sheet, because they have plenty of those, okay? Always include ages of your interviewees except for expert sources. So when we say expert sources, everybody who isn't an opinion source. Expert source, kind of like your medical doctor, right, or the president of the university, right? So all the opinion sources, you will want to put their age. Here's just some examples. So the bottom 2 are really important. That's how you write out 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, whatever. 20-year-old. That's how we do it AP style, okay? You don't write out actual 20, you use the numerical value. And then even this is really interesting, the 19 dash, if you're talking about two people, you also do that because it's describing that person. Months, dates, and time. Months with no year or no date are just spelled out. Now, with the date, there are abbreviated months, not all of them. And they're just here, January, February, September, October, November, and December. That's just with the date. So without a date, you spell it out. With a date, these are the only months that you abbreviate. Okay? I know it's a lot to it. I know there's a lot to it. Here's some examples. So February 26th, that's with the date. You don't write it out, you put it abbreviated. But with the year, it's different. You do write it out. Okay? We all get that? We all good? I want to see some nods. Yes? Good. Okay, just in case. So never use dates with days. I don't know why they do this. That's just AP style. I like including the days with the dates, but don't, because in journalism apparently they don't do that. All right, no first, second, third, or fourth. We don't need it. Okay? I know it might be clarifying, but we also look for brevity, and that's just the briefest thing possible. Just take out first the ST, whatever, ND, RD, TH. Use figures except for noon and midnight. So if it's noon or midnight, you write out NOON or midnight. AM and PM, capitalized or not? It's not. Don't capitalize it. You do use periods for them in AP style. And you also don't have to put the colon 00 when you're talking about time. That just bleeds back into brevity. The event will take place from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Simple and straightforward. I love it. I know it's a lot. We have any questions so far? Good. We are. What's up?
This slide gonna be on the
on Blackboard? Yes. Also, so a lot of this is just peeled from the main lecture notes that Miss Professor Holt puts on Blackboard also. So if you like, just put them both side by side. She goes 2 or 3 times more in depth with the GSP stuff. Okay. So when in doubt, I would just download her slides and then look through hers. Addresses. So partial addresses are listed out completely. So you don't abbreviate anything in partial address. So if you don't have a complete address, you write out the whole thing, the whole name. Complete addresses, you use abbreviated streets, abbreviated information. So highway, street, road, so RD, right? The examples are a little interesting. Like I said, they're peeled off from the main lecture slides. But the reason why the first one is incorrect is because apparently it's partial. So if it said, for instance, 7604 Bear Creek Highway, 1500 block of Avenue P, that's a full address. That's when you write out avenue. But apparently right here, it is a partial address, okay? 1500 block of Avenue P, that's good. Look at the examples. Interstate 27. On the second reference, we already know you're talking about Interstate 27. What's up?
Is that particularly when you're referring to a business?
Which example?
When you're writing down an address, is that only for a business?
Yeah. So if you're ever just talking about a business, you'll want to do it
What if I'm just talking
completely.
about like a home address?
Home address? Then no, it's separate from a business. So, but if you have the full home address, then you abbreviate. You know what I mean? So if you have just a partial piece of the home address, then you write it out fully. It's weird. I know, it's weird. Yeah, okay, good. But yeah, whenever you're referring to a business, then yeah, just use the complete address. You'll definitely want to find a complete address somewhere. All right? And some more examples at the bottom. Okay, let's get into GSP. This one's got so much information. So, like I just talked about, the Professor Holt's slides are on Blackboard, so I suggest going to Blackboard, going to Lectures and Notes, going to IWA information, and just download the PowerPoint, AP Style and Basic GSP. And I believe it starts from slide 16 and then just goes all the way down the rest of her slides. I think it was like 20 or 30. And like I said, she gets 2 or 3 times more in depth. So for directional indicators, you don't capitalize directional indicators. Eastbound, east, west, north, north side. Okay, you don't capitalize those things. West of Lubbock, don't capitalize. Western area, don't capitalize. Now, we are in West Texas. That you do capitalize. So you capitalize sections, not directions. Okay? There's some examples at the bottom. Geographic regions, West Texas, West Coast. Everybody good? Good. First ones make sense. Capitalize days of the week, months, and holidays. Don't capitalize seasons, like we're, what we're in. Spring, fall, winter, whatever. Don't capitalize seasons. Names and titles. I saw a lot of this on the BWA. So, proper titles are capitalized and abbreviated when placed before a person's name. So if a work title precedes a person's name, that's when it's capitalized. Any other time, it's not. If you're talking about, if they call me intern Rhett, then you capitalize it. If we're talking about the intern Rhett, it's not capitalized. You get me? Because they would call it intern Rhett, right? So Director of Communications, Mike Jones. There's an example. Titles after a person's name are a little bit different. They're spelled out and not capitalized. And typically, if it's a longer title, you would follow this style here. If it's a longer title, just put the name first, put a comma, and write out the title completely. Okay? Good. Noun possessive, so apostrophes and stuff like that. This can also get confusing too. There's a lot to it. All right? The first one is simple. John has a computer. John's computer. We all know that. This next one I had never heard of. I think this is specific to journalism. So with names ending with S, if it sounds kind of weird, then you can put an apostrophe after the S. There's Jesus has a dog. Jesus' dog. Right? I've never done that sort of thing before. But for AP style, if you want to, we look for clarity, and that makes things more clear. So singular, there are singular and plural versions of possessiveness, okay? Which took me a while to learn in high school, right? The boy's jacket, a singular boy. A person's car, a singular person. Now, there's plural. The boy's jacket can also be plural. Boys sounds both, with the apostrophe, sounds both singular and plural. But how you differentiate this is with the apostrophe. So if it's plural, you put it on the outside of the S. Got it? The outside. And then people is already plural in general, so if you were talking about possessive for the people, then you put it on the outside of the S. Okay, so just be mindful of that when you're putting apostrophes. Make sure it's singular or plural. Here's an example. Mr. and Mrs. Jones have a black car. It's two separate things you're meaning here. The Joneses, so there's two Jones, right? We're just saying that the Jones has a car. The Joneses have a car. Or the Joneses' car is black. Now we're talking about possessive, right? Everybody get the difference? Yeah? Yeah? Good. Pronouns and tense. I think we all know what pronouns are. They're stand-ins for nouns. So he, she, him, or her, it's, you, them, this, nobody, everyone. Stand-ins for nouns. Stand-ins for names, for instance. Tense. I also saw a lot of this in the BWA. Typically, when you start a sentence in a specific tense, you're going to want to end in that tense. So if you start in present, typically you're going to end in present. There are obviously exceptions to that sort of thing. But like we talked about, we want clarity. We want straightforwardness. So when you're writing this sort of stuff, we don't want to see too many commas. We don't want to see really, really long sentences. You just get directly to the point. You're not telling a story, okay? So here's an example. I'm celebrating my birthday party with my friends and we had a wonderful time. Which are we doing? Are we currently celebrating or is it done? We had a wonderful time. I'm celebrating. So if we started in present, we're going to end in present. I'm celebrating my birthday party with my friends and we're having a wonderful time. Right? ing. Same difference for when we want to do past tense. I celebrated my birthday party with my friends and we had a wonderful time. Right? Good. Punctuation. There are specific ways to use a lot of this punctuation. So semicolons separates two full, it's supposed to be TWO, two full sentences or independent clauses without a conjunction. The way I use semicolons is if you start off with a thought and you don't want to finish that thought, but you think for clarity you ought to put punctuation, make things clearer, you can use a semicolon, right? So here's an example. This is a solid exam. I don't want to finish the thought, but I want to make things clearer, so I put a semicolon. This is a solid exam. I thought the format worked well. Those are two independent clauses. We got a subject, a verb, and an object in both of those. You can also, you don't even have to use the semicolon if you don't want. This is a solid exam, comma, and I thought the format worked well, right? So, excuse me. Let's see. They can also be used in comma-heavy sentences to avoid confusion. You shouldn't really have comma-heavy sentences to begin with, so I would just steer clear of that in the first place, so then you don't even have to worry about using semicolons. And then colons are a great way to prepare for a list. The ingredients in this recipe are colon. Now we know you're about to list. If you start off a list with a semicolon, every single punctuation mark should be a semicolon. All right, so you can exchange the comma and the semicolon in a list, but you got to make sure it stays consistent. And if I were y'all, I would just stick with the commas anyway. All right? Commas. Okay, you use them with compound sentences, which are two full sentences with a conjunction. A lot of times you can see this with these words here: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. If they're in the exact same sentence, typically a comma comes before these words. Okay? So just pay attention to those sorts of things. I will count off for it, especially run-ons. Please be careful with run-on sentences. Those really hurt your grade. You can use them after conjunctive adverbs. So however, nevertheless, furthermore, therefore. Those also can be introductory phrases. Right? When adjectives come after nouns. I saw a few of these also. So if you want to add some description in a sentence, you have to separate the description sentence with commas in the bracket of the full sentence. Does that make sense? So my jacket, comma, just made with leather straps, comma. You got to separate that. A lot of what I saw was using just one comma and it bleeds in to the rest of the sentence and it doesn't make sense. Okay? And obviously use them with lists. Any questions before we go on? I feel like I've been talking for an eternity. Good. All right. Dashes. This one's interesting. Honestly, again, if I were y'all, I would just steer away from dashes in general. But it's here for if you need it. So you can do it when linking two parts of a sentence. Okay, two parts of a sentence. Where you can also do it where you add parentheses. So if you just prefer dashes to parentheses, here's an example down here. My grandmother bought me a puppy. Instead of parentheses, dashes, an adorable bulldog for my birthday. It offsets the sentence. Makes it a little bit clearer. We see a lot more of this in journalism than academic writing or fiction writing. Okay? You can do it to set off a description or who or what a subject is. So, overarching theme here, guys, is it adds clarity. If you have a really confusing paragraph or a really confusing sentence, take a look at adding some dashes or parentheses somewhere. Yeah? You can also use it to clean up a sentence with a lot of commas. Again, we shouldn't really struggle with that in the first place, so you may not have to worry about adding some dashes there anyway. Hyphens. All right. A lot of times, if you think a hyphen should go somewhere, just look it up on Google, and it'll tell you if a hyphen ought to go there. But a lot of times, hyphens separate prefixes. All, co, ex, great. Then some numbers in capital letters. There's some examples. T-shirt, 40-foot drop. Yeah? Kind of get the general idea. Prefixes ending with the same letter as the root. So pre-existing, re-establish. You see what I mean there? So it's P-R-E-E. Yeah? Good. So confusing words, and recovered from the flu and recovered her living room chair. Right? You don't want to use recovered twice without a hyphen in there somewhere. Otherwise, it makes it just a little confusing. Compound adjectives before a noun they describe or as a standalone noun. So, for instance, when y'all are putting ages up here, That's where you add the hyphens. 25 dash, year dash, old. That's how you write it out. All right, I'm harping on that because I see a lot of it that's not written the right way. So please just, if you remember anything, remember that, how to write out names. Grammar. Okay, I saw a few run-on sentences. If you look at your paragraphs and you just have sentences that seem to never end, there's no punctuation in between 2 or 3 things that can be sentences, likely a run-on, okay? So, like we talked about, we look for clarity and brevity. So you're not going to want to see 3 or 4 lines without any punctuation. That's just dangerous to begin with, all right? She tried to sneak out of the house. Her mother saw her leaving. No punctuation. All you need is punctuation and a conjunction in there to make it fine, good. She tried to sneak out of the house, comma, but her mother saw her leaving. Makes sense, okay? Vagueness. See a lot of this too. This is easy to do. When John found his dog, he was happy. Who was happy? John or the dog? Right? So a better sentence would be John was happy when he found his dog. You'd be a little bit more specific. Affect versus effect. This one takes a minute to get the handle of. All right? Affect is a verb. Effect is typically a noun. Okay? So, yeah, it's odd. I know, it's odd. So the storm knocked out the power, affecting some houses. That's not right. We need a verb there. And verbs a lot of times end in ing. Okay, so if you see an ing somewhere, just know that's likely a verb. So the storm knocked out the power, affecting some houses. Does that make sense? Affect versus effect. That's the easiest way I've been able. No, it's tough. Right. You're going to have to practice a little bit of it because you affect and effect. I want to write it out somewhere. You affect and effect. I don't know how else to make that simpler. Affect is the verb, effect is the noun. So, let's see. I'm trying to think of an example. Radiation affected me. Is there an A or an E? Anyone take a guess?
E.
A. Affected me. Right? Affected. I wish I put another example on there. Okay, the effects of radiation hurt. What's that? E. It just takes some practice. All right? It takes some practice. Okay, I think we're making pretty decent time. I thought it'd take a little bit longer. There are different reporting styles, which is what we're going to get into now. And the reporting styles I mean are, for instance, the inverted pyramid. Okay? So here's some types of stories. General news, profile, explanatory, issues and trends, investigative, narrative, and descriptive. Day in the life. Those are some types of stories. Now, some of the styles suit some of these stories a little bit better than others. All right? I talked about looking specifically for the inverted pyramid. Y'all don't have to use the inverted pyramid, which is what we're going to get into now. But I do want to say that if you decide to use a different style than the inverted pyramid, when you are submitting, please in the comments, go ahead and write whichever style you're going to put down so I know I'm looking for it. Otherwise, this is my default. There's a good chance I'm going to get confused if I don't see which style you're gunning for. All right? I don't want to count off for that. So we talked about it before. Your lead, your nut graph, the 6 honest serving men. Put some quotes, details, background info. Good for it's. This is a general style that goes well with most everything. Now there's some complaints. It's that it's outdated and boring. But like I said, it's general. If you want to run with something tried and true, this is what you run with. Okay? There is a narrative style. Now I caution people on this because we're not writing a novel. All right? And a lot of times when we hear narrative or we want to use the narrative style, we end up droning on and on and on. The information maybe we don't need. All right, but you can. So it's best for profiles if you're doing profiling on people. It's good for secondary coverage of human-driven stories. Human-driven. So stories about people. Basic parts. You have exposition, rising action, point of insight, resolution, and denouncement. This, I don't know if y'all have seen this sort of thing before. So it's like how to tell any story. You've got that. You go up, then you go down, right? So it goes exposition, up, 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 rising action, up, 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 point of insight, up, resolution, down, denouncement. Okay? Picture this narrative style like a mini story. And when I say mini, I mean mini. Okay, you want to make this as brief as possible, even though it's a narrative style. The hourglass. I want to show you before I get into it, just so you have a better idea. Okay, so you put the bulk of the information up at the top, everything important everybody wants to know, then you put a mini story at the bottom, beginning, middle, and an end. Right? So here's parts of it. 3 to 4 paragraphs of the information readers want. The most important info up at the top. Then you add just a little mini story at the bottom. So facts, then there's a turn. So when they say turn, it means a transitional phrase. You try and hook the reader with something like eyewitnesses said the pursuit is still ongoing. Right? It brings in attention. Then you add the narrative. Beginning, middle, and end. You put some details, some dialogue, every other piece of information you think is good for a story. That's where you put it. So this is a combo of the inverted pyramid and narrative styles. If you can't decide which one you want to use, here's a good one. Think of it as like a middleman. And if, like I said, if you can't decide, just roll with this. There's that photo of it again. Those really help. I don't really know why, but they help a lot. So the main news, main bulk of information, most important stuff, okay? You don't want to get into the narrative at the top. You want to do that in the paragraphs lower, all right? The kebab. This one's interesting. So you start with an anecdote. Anecdote is a personal experience. And you want to make the anecdote really juicy, okay? You want to hook readers with the anecdote. Then you put your nut graph, meat, and you end with an anecdote. So this is how I like to describe it. You start juicy, hook people in, then you put all the other information people need to know, background stuff. Okay, background stuff. And then you end juicy with another anecdote. So, do we have any questions? Because I think we just about going to wrap this up. No? Good.